The fall in Genesis 3 is the oldest Jewish and Christian answer to the problem of evil and suffering. Adam and Eve freely choose to distrust and obey God at the instigation of a fallen evil angel, the devil. In this one narrative, we get a few different answers to the origin of evil and suffering. The first answer or origin is the devil, also called Satan. Of course, that merely raises the question about the origin of Satan and his own sin and evil. But ultimately, whether it is Satan or Adam and Eve, the Christian answer is that evil originated and continues to originate in the free will choices of rational beings. Lastly, Genesis 3 tells us that death and at least some sufferings, like toil and extremely painful childbirth, come from the curses or punishments of God for sin. Of course, it's important to point out that even though they are often referred to as curses or punishments, it is quite possible and even reasonable to see and refer to these punishments as good discipline and even mercy from God. The sin of Adam and Eve was fundamentally one of distrust and pride. And so one can see how these punishments can foster and restore faith, trust, and humility before God. So one might say implicitly, we find yet another fourth answer to the problem of evil and suffering, namely that God brings good out of it. Clement of Alexandria says suffering can come from God's chastisement to correct and encourage sinners to become ashamed and repent, to help them avoid unbelief and judgment. Interestingly, Clement says that God does not punish, at least not in the sense of retaliation for evil. So in his mind, all chastisement or punishment from God is for the good of those who are chastised or punished, both collectively and individually. This answer to the problem of suffering, namely God's discipline or chastisement, is not a popular one, probably for at least two reasons. First, because, as Jesus tells us and shows us, obviously not all suffering is just and deserved punishment from God. Sometimes God allows suffering not as a punishment, but for other purposes. The second reason is because Clement's idea that God does not punish is very popular today in the modern world, though it often understands it very differently than Clement did, who merely meant God disciplines and chastises for our good rather than retaliates in a human sense. But it's not popular these days to talk about God punishing anyone because it seems too harsh to modern sensibilities. We often prefer to think of God as kind and gentle, meek and mild, but as any good father knows, strictly speaking and properly understood, there is no contradiction between a God who punishes and a God who loves.